Hi everyone and welcome to a new Diablo 4 video in which I'll share my version of a low-life barrier shield-based ball lightning sorcerer build with you that can take on higher tiers up to tier 14 plus of Abattoir Zir without requiring any uber unique items and allows for speed farming tier 9 to level your glyph. I got inspired by the player Arcuade who initially came up with this impressive build composition, whose link you can also find in the description below. I wanted to see how far I could push it with my current gear without all the gear switching and grind for the Tears of Blood glyph, which currently sits at level 23 while I was recording this. Without further ado, let's dive right in. The idea of this build is to stay at or below 35% of our max life to become injured while having a barrier up at all times that can absorb any incoming damage. Meanwhile, we are using ball lightning and the gravitational aspect to deal damage and multiply it with the Conjuration Mastery passive by our Ice Blades and Lightning Spears. This build doesn't make you immortal and requires some practice to get used to because you won't need your healing potions any longer and need to keep an eye on your cooldowns and skill rotation, but it will greatly pay off once you master it. Here's a short excursus into how damage reduction works in Diablo 4 to understand the underlying concept of this low life mechanic. Any incoming damage is instantaneous and calculated when the hit occurs and, therefore, only takes the injured threshold at 35% into account at the moment the damage is applied. Hence, it's essential to be considered injured at any time to benefit from this damage reduction source that we can get on our pants, boots, and amulet. Moreover, we need to be able to trust and rely entirely on our barrier, as any damage taken will ideally only damage the shield and not touch our actual life. In the example shown, with 10k max life and a potential hit of 10k damage taken, we would die if we were at full life despite the 80% damage reduction while injured because we are not injured at the moment the damage is taken, but only lose 2k health points if we were already injured without a barrier. With a barrier on top, we would not lose any health points at all as it will fully absorb the 2k damage dealt. This way, we can primarily focus on one defensive stat and otherwise go into full offense as its only condition is to be injured, while other affixes like damage reduction from close, distant, or burning enemies only cover a portion of the incoming damage or cannot go up as high as the injured one. We can also be more relaxed on armor due to the overall damage reduction we get when all reduction sources are combined. Most of the time, it's elemental damage causing the problems, and by pulling and stunning enemies via Raiment of the Infinite, we can at least avoid physical damage more easily. You might have noticed that I decided to use a healing potion before because my barrier in life dropped to a bare minimum. I could have continued with the life remaining, but either way, it could have been fatal with the slightest mistake. If we get damaged while our barrier is inactive, the game is still on, but ending up in this state will often lead to unpleasant situations. Having enough cooldown reduction and observing your active cooldowns is key and can vastly reduce this from happening, but if it does, we can heal up and try to get our life back down to the injured state again with small mobs while avoiding being damaged by big monsters during this time, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. We can get and refresh a barrier whenever we are casting a cooldown skill thanks to the protection passive. I'm running Teleport, Ice Armor, Ice Blades, Unstable Currents, and, what might be controversial, Lightning Spear instead of Flame Shield. I decided to go this route because the overflowing energy key passive will greatly lower the cooldowns of our 3 cooldown based shock skills. In contrast, Ice Armor and Ice Blades are the ones we need to take special care of, as their cooldowns will either reset after some time or Ice Armor as well as teleport via the Elemental Attunement passive on a lucky hit. With better gear, Flame Shield might be the better option, making you immune and unstoppable for 2 to 3 seconds. Lightning Spear, on the other hand, can increase our damage by an additional 6 to 12% multiplicative damage. Currently, there is no convenient way to make our character's life drop to this injured threshold lower or equal to 35% of our max life, meaning we will need to find some monsters in the open world to damage us to reduce our life. In case we lose too much health, consider using the Undying Vampiric Power to heal yourself back up for a few percent. As mentioned, it's very important to aim for 100% barrier uptime by gathering as much cooldown reduction as possible. I recommend a minimum of 30%, ideally 40% or more, as the slightest gap in barrier downtime can result in death. The Ice Blades enchantment will help us further reduce our skills cooldowns and also contribute to our damage while we use the Fire Bolt enchantment to increase our damage reduction against burning enemies. Moreover, as crucial as cooldown reduction are additional ranks of teleport, which will provide us with a constant damage reduction via shimmering teleport, stun enemies around us via Raiment of the Infinite, and make us unstoppable every 3 seconds. I was lucky to get this protection pylon at the end of the run, which helped me throughout most of the fight against these Bloodseekers. With more cooldown reduction, more damage overall, and access to the Shaco, you should be able to push up to tier 19 without much hassle. Let's talk gear and take a closer look at it. I focused on cooldown reduction, max life, and maximum mana on the helm. I then went for intelligence for more damage, but you can also use an armor roll if you feel too squishy, as I did with earlier iterations of this build. It also uses the disobedience aspect for this extra armor when dealing damage. We use Raiment of the Infinite in this build, which I'd consider a requirement if you want to push higher tiers. It allows us to stun and pull enemies together to deal the most damage possible in a short time. Although we lose many damage reduction related stats, remember that we get most of it back from damage reduction while injured. On the gloves, we use the intercom aspect for increased multiplicative damage of up to 30% while standing still, which synergizes well with the pixel pulls via Raiment, and we focus on resource generation as well as attack speed, critical strike chance, and lucky hit chance. Alternatively, you can use Fists of Fate for more theoretical damage of up to 50% multiplicative and defensive lucky hit effects while missing out on the other 3 attributes. I still wanted some critical strike chance and attack speed, so I went with the legendary gloves instead. On the pants, we go with the ever-living aspect for taking less damage from crowd-controlled or vulnerable enemies and heavily focus on damage reduction while injured on these, ideally also on ranks of Ball Lightning and another unconditional damage reduction stats such as damage reduction from burning enemies, as everything will burn around us thanks to the Firebolt enchantment. You can choose between max life and total armor. The boots are our second most important piece to make this low life build work and survive the one or other hit, with as much damage reduction while injured as possible we can get on it. Ranks of teleport are equally important to reduce the cooldown of teleport, and the rest can be mana cost reduction and maybe movement speed instead of intelligence. It has the exploiter's aspect to maximize our damage against unstoppable enemies. You can consider using AoZ's heirloom for speed farming lower tiers, as seen in the video, as it will greatly speed up the runs. The wand goes with the conceited aspect for more damage while having a barrier, which will be up all the time, and we focus on intelligence, all stats, damage to close enemies, and either lightning damage or critical strike damage. On the amulet, I would go with the Storm Swell instead of the gravitational aspect. I would focus on cooldown reduction instead of intelligence as well as damage reduction while injured. Other than that, try to focus on ranks of mastery skills and ranks of the Conjuration Mastery passive for maximizing our damage. Then we go with the obligatory Tal Rasha ring for up to 60% multiplicative and unconditional damage, while we also get cooldown reduction from it, and have the Elementalist's aspect on our second ring for increasing our critical strike chance when casting mastery skills at or above 100 mana. We focus on critical strike chance, max life, maximum mana, and resource generation. If you experience cooldown reduction issues, try to use this Fall's Corroded Signet instead. The offhand then uses the gravitational aspect with cooldown reduction stats focusing on primary resource generation. We are maxed out on all our resistances and will still be able to crit with 34% via the Elementalist's aspect, which will boost it up to 70% and more. When it comes to the defensive stats, armor somewhat because neglectable this build, although I started to feel it when playing with 5.8k only. Other than that, we have 77% damage reduction while injured in total, and on top get damage reduction from burning, vulnerable, elites, and all damage reduction from shimmering teleport and the resilience vampiric power. I still went with more max life to take the one or other hit in case I needed to heal up due to my cooldown reduction of only 30%. Another focus was on increasing the mana pool and resource generation in general, which is at 176 to make Elementalist work in the first place. More movement speed at around 120% and cooldown reduction of 40% or more would increase the survivability and the chance for success. Regarding Vampiric Powers, we go with a Curse Touch to apply a Vampiric Curse and further make enemies vulnerable via Prey on the Weak. We then again go with Ravenous to increase our attack speed since it plays well with Ball Lightning, and use the Resilience Vampiric Power to constantly benefit from at least 32.5% damage reduction since we are playing low life and are always missing at least 65% of our life. Last but not least, Domination, for increasing our multiplicative damage against stunned enemies and killing injured non-elite enemies instantly, which is very beneficial when pushing higher tiers. If you experience mana problems, try using Feed the Coven for a chance to restore primary resource when Ice Blades or Lightning Spears hit. It will also provide a multiplicative damage increase of 10%. And so does the Infection Vampiric Power when paired with the Tal Rasha Ring. I didn't bother switching in these runs, but you can put it in at the beginning of a run and switch it out with Domination again, as it will stay active until you don't attack anymore. Looking at the skill tree, we put 2 points into Firebolt to use it as an enchantment to make all enemies burn. We max out Elemental Dominance under core skills to increase our damage by 9% multiplicative when casting Ball Lightning above 50 mana. In the defensive skills section, we max out Teleport to reduce its cooldown to be able to cast it every few seconds, and go with Shimmering Teleport to get the 30% damage reduction for 3 seconds on top. We put 1 point into Ice Armor, Enhanced Ice Armor, and Mystical Ice Armor to boost the incoming damage we can take with the barrier we get, and put 1 more point into Elemental Attunement for a lucky hit chance to reset our defensive skill cooldowns. We use 2 Conjuration skills and therefore put 1 point into Ice Blades and Summoned Ice Blades to reduce the cooldown of our skills, which is crucial for this build and gear to work. 1 more point goes into Lightning Spear to cast it and trigger the Ice Blades enchantment. We max out the Conjuration Mastery passive for a 6% multiplicative damage increase per active conjuration, which will often be more than 5 and therefore equal to 30% or more damage. We also max out Precision Magic for 15% increased lucky hit chance and go with 2 points into Align the Elements to max out further mana shield for as much damage reduction as possible. The Protection passive is another crucial part of this build, as we will get a barrier whenever we use a cooldown. We max this out so that our maximum life-based barrier can absorb as much damage as possible. In the Mastery Skills section, we max out Icy Veil to extend our barrier duration, max out Ball Lightning for most damage and Wizard's Ball Lightning for forming Crackling Energy, which should solve our mana issues, and also put 2 more points into Static Discharge and 3 points into Invigorating Conduit to gain mana when absorbing Crackling Energy. Moving on to the Ultimate Skills section, we put 2 points into Frigid Breeze to generate additional mana, which our 4 to 5 active Ice Blades will constantly contribute to. We unlock Unstable Currents with Prime Unstable Currents for more attack speed and Supreme Unstable Currents to help with reducing our cooldowns. Speaking about cooldowns, the Overflowing Energy Key passive is there to reduce our shock skill cooldowns whenever Crackling Energy hits an enemy, and 4 out of our 6 skills are shock skills. Here's another quick look at the skills used with Teleport, Ice Armor, Ice Blades, Lightning Spear, Unstable Currents, and Ball Lightning, while using the Ice Blades enchantment primarily for cooldown reduction and Firebolt for damage reduction from burning enemies. This build uses 7 Paragon boards, with the first one using the Tears of Blood glyph to boost our non-physical damage and resistances. My glyph currently sits at level 23, so another board needs to be found for it when its radius increases when reaching level 50. For now, it provides the most by just leaving it here. The second board is Burning Instinct and uses the Tactician glyph to boost the rare nodes by 125%, primarily for the damage reduction from burning enemies, and for the multiplicative damage increase of 10%. Consider switching places with the Tears of Blood glyph. I decided to also take the damage reduction related nodes on the left for more survivability. The third board is Enchantment Master, which uses the Elementalist glyph for another boost of its surrounding non-physical damage and resistance nodes, as well as another multiplicative damage increase with fire, cold, and lightning damage by 15%. Moving on to the fourth board with the Elemental Summoner Legendary node, we use the Charged glyph to increase our multiplicative damage when picking up Crackling Energy by up to 15%. We mainly focus on the mana and maximum life related nodes on the top right and grab the resistance node on the left to max our resistances. We use the Frigid Fate legendary node in the 5th board to boost our damage against vulnerable enemies via non-physical damage and use the control glyph for increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies and 20% increased multiplicative damage against stun enemies. I decided to come in from this direction to eventually grab more maximum life related nodes, but you can consider coming from below for the vulnerable related damage and damage reduction nodes. On the 6th board, we got Static Surge, where the Adept glyph comes into play to increase our mastery skill damage and area of effect. We max out its damage with the remaining Paragon points and focus again on the mana-related nodes in the lower left corner, which gives us another damage boost against stun enemies. Last but not least, the 7th board is Ceaseless Conduit, where we are using the Destruction glyph to increase our critical strike damage and gain up to 12% more multiplicative damage when critically striking. And this, my fellow sorcerers, is the end of this video. I hope I was able to shed some light on the mechanics of this low-life injured build. It combines the best of both worlds, gives you maximum survivability with the right gear, and lets you focus on maximizing your damage. Let me know what you think and if you have any questions or suggestions in the comments section. Thank you for watching, have fun, and see you next time, goodbye.